So we'll go ahead and get started. This is responsive images in Drupal. Links to both the session page and the slides are here. Badcamp -RIID-session or Badcamp RIID slides. And they're both bit.ly links that'll take you to the appropriate sites. If you want to tweet or talk about the session, the hashtag is hashtag Badcamp. So we'll go ahead and, like I said, we'll get started. I am James Neddick. I'm a front-end developer for Atten Design Group. We're an agency out in Denver who work with universities, institutions, nonprofits, companies looking to make a positive change or a positive influence in the world. So we work with companies, a lot of universities here in California, as well as other institutions around the world. You can help me on the internet if you want to. I'm at JNeddick pretty much everywhere: Twitter, GitHub, Drupal.org. So I'm not checking those notifications, so if you heckle me now, I'll find that out later. Before we get talking really about responsive images, we need to understand a couple things first, just about images in general. And the first is that we've really been oversimplifying images. And it makes sense. We fill our designs with them. We put them into WYSIWYG editors just as kind of an HTML blob. And one of the big benefits, of Drupal, or maybe one of the big detriments to Drupal, is that it can kind of abstract us away from a lot of that complexity sometimes. And at the same time, we use them so much in our designs, we become maybe a bit jaded to those. I talk a lot with designers or with clients, and they're just like, hey, let's add an image, as if it was just something really that we're not putting any more thought into it than that. But the truth is that images by themselves are complex, not even thinking responsive. Images have a lot of their own unique properties. So they have dimensions. They have a defined height and width, and that doesn't change regardless of what we see on the screen, which sometimes lies to us. They have their own defined height and width, and those are absolute values. Apart from that, they have a file type. So some are JPEGs, some are GIFs, some are PNGs. There's a lot more. And with those individual file types, there comes a lot more complexity. JPEGs have different levels of compression. If you want transparency, you can use PNGs or GIFs. If you want animation, you can use GIFs. If you want a bunch of other things, there's other file formats. And so all of those things kind of add up to one really, really, really important property, and that's file size. So depending on what we're trying to achieve depends on what we pick with those. Images themselves are also small pockets of structured content. So apart from just the source, which is this is the file that we're loading, and apart from all of those properties that comes with that file, we also want to define an alt text. So what a screen reader or what a search engine is going to see. A title attribute, which I've learned recently is maybe not the best thing to now put on images. There are better alternatives, but it's still something that's kind of, I think, still thought of as a good practice. It's still something that's in the Drupal interface, so that's something else we can add. So it's not just load this image, it's all of the structure that comes with it. And like I said, images are important. They convey so much information in such a small amount of time to our end users. That's why we use them so much. That's why there's so much discussion around them right now. Currently, at least the last time I checked the HTTP archive, 63% of a page is made up of images. And this is just kind of these numbers in aggregate. That accounts for 1.3 megabytes of a total page weight on average on the internet. And over the last 3 years, our use of images in our designs, in our web pages, have doubled. This probably comes from the fact that CMSs are becoming more and more prevalent, so clients are now adding more and more images. They have the control to do that, sometimes without understanding the complexities or using them with the discretion they need to. And so all of that's just images as they've always existed, as we've always used them, before responsive design and still now. Responsive images are a lot more complex. And like everything else that we do, responsive design has made things a little bit more complex. So on top of everything that we just talked about, we also need to consider that we have to now adapt for different resolutions. Like I mentioned before, images have a defined height and width, but the way we display them or render them to the screen sometimes deceives us in that. Changing screen sizes and fluid layouts. It's not just a matter about the viewport, but the column, our grid system that we're rendering these images in. We're also doing different resolutions. And Apple right now I think is one of the big ones that they're coming out with 2, 3, 4x images or screen resolutions. So we're trying to make sure that our images look as crisp as possible on all of those different resolutions. One of the other things about screen size to think about is all of our mobile devices have 2 orientations. That's 2 different aspect ratios. So you might have an image that looks great on your desktop monitor at more of a landscape orientation, but you scale that down and try to fit that within the context of a portrait device, and maybe the image doesn't quite hold up. So how do we address those design concerns there? And then the last one, and this has been a big one, we've been dealing with this for a while too, is browser support for new file types. It took roughly 10 years, I think the number was, for us to get support for PNGs to where we could start using them. And we were kind of in this catch-22 of browser vendors wanted to make sure it was something developers were going to use in order for them to want to implement it. But we had no way to fall back to other things, so we weren't going to use it until it was more widely supported. So it was just kind of this really awkward standoff. And now we're having file formats like JPEG XR and WebP that offer better compression, better performance, but they're not fully supported. So how do we flush out that new territory in a safe way that doesn't penalize our users? And last, we're also now dealing with metered, expensive, and unreliable mobile networks. If you're working with clients in other parts of the world, you could be dealing with proxy servers, and so you're not always in control of how fast this image is going to load. It might look beautiful, but that doesn't matter if the user never sees it. So why is this important, and why am I kind of starting with the question of why? One of the biggest criticisms of the entire responsive image spec as it's evolved, has been its complexity. And we'll see some of that here in a little bit. But I think the important thing to take away is this: we're trying to solve a lot of really important problems. And so we're not, you can't expect, at least in the first iteration, a very simple solution. But like I mentioned before, one of the nice things about Drupal is it has a way of distancing ourselves from a lot of that complexity. So it does kind of make this a lot simpler. Quick disclaimer, this isn't going to be a deep dive into responsive images. I kind of want to touch on responsive images in terms of the syntax. I want to touch on a lot of the key points, understanding what we're trying to achieve in the markup to better understand the interface that Drupal, at least in Drupal 7, has. So the place to start there is with the image tag. Every responsive image solution, it exists to alter our image source. So you have your image, you have your source and your alt, and all that happens is we start layering things on top of that for the browser to swap out the source as it decides. So we start with that, and then we add the source set attribute. Now this is great for use cases like resolution and just scaling images up or down, whether it's because of size or whether it's because of resolution. This handles image scaling. Source set aims to inform the browser to make an educated choice on its own. So you can see by the syntax here, you have image, source set, and we just provide, we'll provide a comma-separated list of here are the options you have to pick from, and then we have 2 different ways of informing it. The first is using X descriptors or density descriptors, and you can kind of see that. Can you see that? Is that clear? Awesome. You can see that you have the file name, and then you have a 2x. And what this assumes is that you're dealing with a fixed width image, so even though you might be in a responsive design, the image itself might not be scaling. So an example of this might be if you're using raster images for icons. Those aren't going to scale as your design does. So they might stay at their fixed width. And so we just want to say, this is the 2x version. If this isn't a 2x device, it falls back to the source, which will be the 1x version. And depending on how you stack what's in the source, maybe you can actually have the fallback be the 2x image if source set isn't supported or things like that. So this is for fixed width images switching on resolution. The next one's a little bit more complicated, but a lot more powerful. And this is W or width descriptors. This gets coupled with, you can kind of see it here, the syntax highlighter is a little awkward, but the sizes attribute. It's now required if you're using source set with width descriptors, you have to have the sizes attribute. And so we're providing the same comma-separated list of sources, large, medium, and small, provided by the physical width of this image. So, if you're on a Mac and you right-click on an image, say Get Info, and you get that list of dimensions, you want the width here, unassuming the layout. This tells the browser, here are our options of our images, and here's how wide they all are. Sizes then allows you to provide all of the different display information to the browser. So here we're saying at a min width of 41.25 ems, this image is going to be rendered on the screen at 38.75 ems. And I just kind of pulled this chunk of code from a really great article. It's linked to in the slides at the end. I'd recommend checking out a lot of them. And it starts in top to bottom order. So it'll hit this one. If that evaluates true, it doesn't check out any of the other ones. So that's kind of why we're going for media query first. And then this is just saying if we're smaller than this screen width, we're doing calc, which is a new CSS thing. And we're just saying it's going to be 100% or 100 viewport widths of the browser minus the gutter on either side. And that's how this is going to visually be rendered. What this gives the browser information to do is evaluate a ton of things now and a ton of things going forward. So the browser can look and say, okay, here's the image options we have. We already know what the viewport width is. We know now relatively how this is going to look in the design. Let's pick the one that's going to work the best. Is this a 2x image? The browser will, or a 2x device. The browser knows that, and we'll pick maybe the one that'll look best for that display, for that rendering on that device. Going forward, as we start working with, or as we start getting bandwidth concerns into browsers, they can just add that in for you, and we don't have to ever update our markup as that starts becoming more prevalent. Now it could be, well, maybe this is, it is a 2x device, but you're on a really slow connection. Let's load the standard resolution version. Or user settings. Maybe I check a box in Chrome that says I don't ever want to load, I want to be in bandwidth saving mode. And so now it'll just default to load those rather than the 2x version. So, and some of those settings we're starting to see now in like the new versions of iOS. So that's kind of the one big distinction between an image with source set and sizes versus the full-fledged picture element, which everyone is kind of probably hearing a lot about. Source set allows the browser to be educated on which source it should pull, and we surrender that control to the browser. Picture, on the other hand, is a great use for art direction, saying, at this screen size for our design, we have to send this image. So picture element allows us to take back that control. Source set allows us to surrender it. And the picture element kind of looks like this. We might have seen this before, where you have your picture wrapper, and then you have source elements, and then our image element at the very last. Source are those distinctions. So we're saying here, anything over 900 pixels, we're going to load the cat vertical JPEG. If it's smaller than that, then we're going to load cat horizontal, and the browser doesn't get a say in that. And then again, if none of this is supported, one of the best things about all of this is it's progressively enhancing the image tag. So if this isn't supported, it loads just the source on the image, and no harm, no foul. One of the things to know here is that on the source element, we have the source set attribute. So just like we saw with putting the source set on the image tag, this is just as full-featured. So now you start getting into this wonderful world of a lot of complexities where, okay, we want to load, this image because it's cropped or the focal point is shifted a certain way, but we still want to make sure it's, altered for screen sizes, for resolutions, for things like that. So what you can then end up doing is something like this, which, you're having, this is everything in the kitchen sink, right? We're dictating per breakpoint the art direction, and then from there we're layering on all of the resolution queries and things like that. Like I said, this is not reminiscent of what we're going to be doing for everything. It's just like I said, this is everything but the kitchen sink. The other thing this is adding onto here that we haven't really talked about, because the functionality doesn't exist yet in Drupal, is type queries. This now also allows us, if you see like this top one, it's saying type equals image WebP. If your browser supports that file type, it'll load that, and you're going to get significant performance gains for those users. If it doesn't support that, it falls back to JPEG. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but it's definitely some interesting things to look into, and there's been a lot of discussion in the Drupal 8 issue queue about how to support that. So, like I said, this is a lot of markup. None of us really want to write that. So, as the old infomercials go, there has to be an easier way. And Drupal does help with that. We use image styles to define all of our images. So the actual creation of all of those sources. We upload one image, Drupal creates all of the alternatives that we want. We use the breakpoints module, which has been backported from D8, and it allows us to define all of the different changes in our layout so Drupal can then become aware of them. And then we use the picture module to allow us to map breakpoints to image styles, and that's essentially what we're doing. And it does a lot more than that, and we'll take a look at that right now. And this is going to be awesome. Now we're going to watch me awkwardly shift from two displays to try to mirror this. So. Right. There we go. And then, all right. We'll zoom in just a little bit. Can everybody see that okay? All right, and no one noticed that. We're going to pretend that was really smooth. So this is a very simple, straightforward example. We have simple blog post. We have the teaser, which is going to have just a fixed or somewhat fixed image. So if we inspect the element and resize the screen, once you get smaller, it jumps down. And then on this, we have on the full view mode, we have the same image as more of a banner layout. But as we start getting down to smaller screen sizes, we realize that this looks really awkward. It's not very tall, and we could utilize this space a little bit better for the device that we're on. So we're going to take into account two of those examples. Let's first address what's on the teaser page. Now, the first thing that we'll do, and I already did this so that we don't have to watch that, is create all of the image styles that we want to work with. So for that thumbnail image, we have the thumbnail small, thumbnail 2x, and then our thumbnail standard. The image that we're loading there, we want at larger displays to be 150 pixels, which is a perfect square. At smaller displays, it'll be 75 pixels. I picked those numbers because it makes the math easy. And you start thinking about the options that we have. Well, 75 pixels on a standard resolution is 150 pixels at a high resolution. And then when we go to larger screens, we have 150 pixels, but that's now going to be 300 pixels for high-resolution devices. So that's why we have three. We have the 75, the 75, the 150, or excuse me, 75, the 150, and the 300. So to put those in action, now that they're created, go to our content type. We go to our blog post, we'll manage the teaser display. And with the picture module enabled, you'll notice you have this option for image with sizes. So we'll pick that. This allows us to create that first set of markup that we saw, the image tag but optimized. We're not even touching the picture element markup yet. And so this is what we do. We just pick which image styles we want to make the browser aware of. There it is. And then we write our sizes markup here. So we want min, width, px. So over 550 pixels of a viewport, we want the image to be displayed visually at, what did I say, 150 pixels. Below that, it's just going to be displayed at 75 pixels. We don't need to include a media condition. We don't need to, it's just anything under that, this is how it's going to be rendered. This is kind of our fallback. Fallback image, this is, this is equivalent to what image source is put on the image tag's source attribute. So for us, just in case we're not supporting, I want the image to look good, so I'll pick the 2x version. And then we update. Now before I save, let's do something real quick. I'm going to inspect the element. And how easy is this to see right now? Not very?
Great.
All right. So this is the image, and you can just see it's what we've seen before. It's just your normal image tag. Now if I save this, come back, refresh the page. Now you can see we have markup that you might not be expecting us to see. Remember I talked about with this, we're really trying to optimize the image source. And here we have a full picture element, a source, and all of the information on here. There's the thumbnail small image at 75 pixels. It's adding those widths for us based on what we defined in our image styles. But why is the markup kind of funny? Right now we're kind of on a little bit of an in-between between browsers fully supporting this markup and how they've implemented things in the past as a way to increase performance. There's something called browser prefetching, where a browser will scan your markup and look for an image with a source, and before it starts doing anything else, try to load those images. It's doing that before it really renders all of this. So we're in this area where sometimes we're getting penalized with duplicate downloads. And so Drupal, a lot of the maintainers of this module, they've included the syntax workarounds for that until that problem gets solved. And so you don't have to worry about, again, you don't have to worry about that. And those are settings in the picture module that you can turn on, turn off, depending on what your priorities are. And then so as things evolve, it's just changing a setting rather than rewriting a bunch of markup. But like I said, here you can now see that we are loading all of the images that we need to. Since we go here, we'll check out the network. You can see right here, this is the thumbnail small. So it's loading that in. Now, like I said, this is where things kind of start getting hairy. This is the most, incidentally, the picture element is actually a lot simpler than this. We're giving browsers control, and not all browsers are implementing the logic in the same way. Some browsers, if it's already loaded a high-resolution version of the image, and you then come back to maybe a smaller resolution, it's not going to load that smaller version because it already has the high-resolution one in cache. So it's a lot more efficient for them at that point to use the high-resolution image with no performance penalty to you. There's a lot of different rules about which browsers use which which source when. So if you're really masochistic, you can go read into that, or just trust that it does what it needs to do for you. Now the next option is, like we talked about, this, where at smaller viewports we want to change the crop itself. So we'll go ahead and, under configuration, so we already defined our image styles. First we go to breakpoints. This empty source set is kind of imagine this being the equivalent of midwidth equals 0. This is all of our defaults. This is everything we need. Just keep this one as is. Then let's go ahead and say large screens. The breakpoint will be so this is our media query for that. We're not going to do any multipliers, but this is where if you wanted to start doing those X descriptors, those pixel density items, you'd select these. You can also add new multipliers here if you wanted to support something else beyond just your standard 1x, 1.5, and 2x. I'm not going to get too deep into those, though. So once we've created that, we'll go ahead and save. This is where we define all of the breakpoints used across our site. But the next thing we have to do is add them into a breakpoint group. And think about it like this. Your site might have 100 breakpoints, depending on all the different components. But your homepage banner image might only have 3 breakpoints. So we've defined them. Now let's create them into a breakpoint group. We'll pick the 2 that we've created, hit save. So now we have our breakpoint group. And this is the blog banner one. And these are the breakpoints that we have available to us now. Now, if we go back to configuration, go to picture mapping, we'll add a new picture mapping. This is where we're going to map those breakpoints that we picked for that group to the image styles that they need to associate with. So pick blog banner, continue, get rid of the title. Me personally, I kind of name my breakpoint groups and my picture mappings the same thing. I've never run into a conflict, and so it kind of helps me organize which ones relate to the other one in my own head. So we're using the blog banner breakpoint group, and then for each of those breakpoints that we picked, we're now saying, all right, what do we want to do? Do we want to use an image style? Or do we want to do what we talked about before, where let's make this fully featured and use source set and sizes on this element as well? For simplicity, we'll just map it straight to an image style, and for this we will say, where is it? Banner large. For this one, we'll say banner small. We'll finish. Now let's take a look at the differences between those 2 image styles that I just picked. This one, the banner large, is 850 pixels by 300. The banner small is 382 by 191 pixels. So if you did the math on this, the aspect ratio is like the image isn't scaling proportionately. Once it hits those, it's going to jump, so the image is just a little bit taller visually. So we get to see more of the image and utilize our space better. So now if we go back to the Manage Display tab for full content, now that we've created a picture mapping for us to pick from, you'll notice there's a new... You'll notice we have the picture element as a field formatter available to us. So we'll pick that. We want our blog banner, the one we just created, our fallback image. So what is the source of the image tag? In this case, we'll just do banner large. I usually leave these unchecked. I've never actually experimented too much with them, so don't have to worry too much about that. We'll go ahead and click Update and Save. Now, we inspect the element and check out the markup. what we should be seeing is our image and two sources. This is the banner large, and this is the banner small. And then if we start bringing this down, it's jumped down, and now it's made the image just a little bit of a different crop. Now this is a bit awkward in that we've now cropped this guy's head off. And how am I doing on time? Nice. The big gain to the picture element is that you get the ability for art direction, but Drupal kind of sets the, let's just scale it and crop it right from the center, which isn't always what we want. So there's another module that's a favorite of mine that allows the user control over how to crop their images. Go to the modules page. The manual crop module is one of my favorite ones. It has a couple JavaScript library dependencies, but it has a really nice interface that's similar to what someone might be used to from, say, cropping your images on Facebook. So, what we'll do with that is we'll go to configuration, we'll go to our image style, and for our banner small, which is the one we were having the issue with, we will go ahead and add manual crop, I believe manual crop, custom crop. We'll add that. We'll say, need to know 382 by 191. We're going to maintain proportions so that way the user can't provide something that we don't want. So they're only able to actually adjust that within the aspect ratio we define. And then fallback, I'll just leave that empty. And you'll see when we add this, it always places a manual crop style at the beginning. You can't move that down and update it. Because the idea is that it's going to crop it first, and then we start laying on anything else that we want to do on top of that. So now that that's done, we'll do a quick configuration on the content type. Once the manual crop module is enabled on any image field, you're going to get a new set of options. You get manual crop. We want to go ahead and enable it. There's a lot of different options for the interface that a user is going to get. I usually just enable it and kind of leave it at the default. And then here we have the option of all of the image styles that is using manual crop, which ones apply to this image. We only have one, so we'll pick it. You also have the option to require. What this means is that a user cannot upload an image without actually taking control over that. I don't like that just because it creates one more step for the user, but there are some cases that might make sense. For the most part, once it's saved, my scale and crop will take over and analyze it. So it kind of provides a default and then lets the user take control should they need to. So we go ahead and save. Now that all of that is done, we'll go look at our content type, click edit, gives us this crop button, so we'll open that. Now we get this nice little just area selecting. Highlight this guy's head, hit save. We bring our image back down. Now his head's not cropped off anymore. So with, what, 3 modules, 4 modules, and a little bit of kind of overwhelming configuration, we're able to actually give performant images served appropriately sized to most devices and give the user back control so that they can control how their images look at every breakpoint if we wanted to. Like I said, it is definitely not the most straightforward thing. There's a lot to it, there's a lot to understand, but the power that this gives us is pretty amazing, and it's still not quite as complex as writing all of that markup ourselves. So, does anybody have any questions? I think we have about 5-10 minutes. So
You had a crop still applied after the manual crop?
Mm-hmm.
Is that necessary?
So, yes and no. Depends on, I suppose, your mindset. What this does is this is the crop afterwards that kind of says if they don't provide their own crop, then scale and crop it anyway. There might be, and I'd be interested in talking to like a more back-end focused person on like there's performance issues with having them both there. I've never run into anything too big, but the idea is then like with that I don't have to require that. The other option that I don't really do too much is this fallback. So I think this is the image style whose cropping should be applied if none is given. So if I had that scale and crop picked as another image style, I could select it here. The reason I don't do that is mostly just for my own like idea of self-documentation. I can look at this style, see what's being affected, and then kind of get an idea as to what all is happening at a glance without having to like click through to all of the different styles that this could be referencing.
So if I wanted to provide a custom crop to the user, but I didn't want there to be a default, then I wouldn't have the second. I would just have the first rule of the manual crop.
Right, you'd have the first rule, and then I would also make sure that on your field config that you require them to actually do the manual crop themselves.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
The source, the actual source attributes, are they trying to remove that so that we can develop it?
No, so the discussions around you're talking about like what are they doing to remove that double source load hit?
Yeah.
I think right now they're trying to work with browser makers or browser vendors to only do the prefetching if it's just a source without it being nested inside a picture or without having a source set.
Are they using the polyfill sconce?
Yeah, picture fill?
Yeah.
Yep. The picture module will add, and I forgot to mention that, so thank you. The picture module will add the picture fill polyfill to your source for you.
But well, I was reading on that, and they were mentioning their recommendation from the picture fill was to remove that. So they remove the source, leave the source set, remove the source so you don't get the double hit. Is that being discussed at all, or
Yeah, so there's a few different options in terms of, if we look at the say maybe picture mappings, settings. So this is sort of how we can decide this. So one for the polyfill, how do we want to provide that? And then here's, so for the picture element, do we want to use the source fallback or source set fallback? And these options are what control like what the markup is. Admittedly, I haven't looked too much into like the differences in the markup that it creates. So.
The last one there, it says source set on image tag. You actually don't have to have the extra tag on your attribute.
Sorry?
You don't have to have the extra tag on your attribute for the actual picture tag. You can actually just use the source set on your image tag like you were describing at the beginning.
Yep.
And yeah, then you don't have that extra tag on it.
You won't have the extra tag, but what this will end up doing is this is the option that will get you the closest to the correct markup. But it's also the option that has the vulnerability to duplicate downloads. And I think that's the biggest drawback to this. It hasn't been one for me I've overly been concerned with that's been preventing me from using it on sites. But it's something that there's been a lot of discussion, both I've seen in the D7 and the D8 versions, as to how do we want to handle this going forward. So this option will get you closer to the correct markup. This one is the one that tries to prevent the duplicate downloads from happening. And so all of the defaults right now assume you want to prevent duplicate downloads. So that's why if you inspect like the Drupal modules markup, it's not going to be what you're going to see in a lot of blog posts as to this is how the markup works. So. Yeah?
How different does this look in Blade?
In Drupal 8, I know there are some differences, and I also know that there's going to be a talk tomorrow about responsive images in Drupal 8. So I would say, to answer that question, check out that session.
What are strategies if the client wants to flip images into body?
What are the strategies if the client wants to put the images into like a body field? How much time do you have? The easy answer is usually IMCE, which won't integrate with any of this, unfortunately. So if you want to apply these to body, I actually like the media module for that. It provides with like CK editor, an interface that you can inject that in, and then from there, if you imagine in your body field, it's just a token that will render the media image entity, and then you get that control back over the templating. So they have the editorial control to place an image wherever they want, but as a front-end developer, you maintain the markup control you want to do. I mean, really whatever you want with the image. Yes?
Yeah, are there any implications with this module for retaining image metadata?
What do you mean specifically?
Like, say, copyright information for an image. Sometimes Drupal loses that information.
I've never really had to. I guess anytime I've done that, it's usually been with like the figure caption option. So I'll put like the copyright information underneath it as a caption. Is there another way to do that you're thinking of specifically?
Well, our graphics department puts a bunch of metadata in the image, and then it complains that it doesn't get maintained when it's downloaded from the website.
Huh. So the question
That's
is...
just one. I know that there's also picture credits that we don't want to show necessarily visibly.
I see.
If somebody were to download the image, we want that information to come along with it.
So the question is does this strip, or does this maintain any metadata applied into the code of the image itself? Not like the HTML, but the binary, I guess, of the image. I assume it strips it out. I actually don't know the answer to that question.
Every time you use the text styles, it removes the text information, so it already.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
When you use text styles, all the exit information that are attached to images are stripped. Actually, there was a discussion on the exit module about this to make sure that exit data is named in all the images, but I'm not sure that that's not. So we should check the exit module.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a link to any of those discussions? Can maybe put on the
It was one of the issues in the exit module. Actually, I can't remember it as well.
Okay.
I college.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh.
Could you go back to the screen with your slide, with your slides and stuff?
Yeah. Which slide?
Well, there was the initial one that had the links to the slides.
Oh, the very first one.
Very first one. Thanks.
Yep. And also, like I mentioned before, and I haven't shown it yet, but the very last slide has a list of a bunch of really good resources. Blog posts on a list apart, blog post on Smashing Magazine, as well as a podcast on the Web Ahead I'd recommend, an interview with Jason Grigsby, who's one of the ones responsible for writing a lot of this. So I'd definitely recommend checking them out for a deeper dive into just the picture element and a lot of that, the technology there. So, any other questions? Yes?
Earlier in the talk, I think you briefly described a scenario where you come up with breakpoints, and then you said, but let's say on one page there are only three. In what scenario would you come up with breakpoints, or was that just you just throwing that out?
So I just threw out a number, but I mean, if you think about overall a very large site, you might be starting to tweak, some layouts, just for that one specific area. So maybe 100 was a bit of an exaggeration, but you might have, a good handful of breakpoints, but only a small segment of them apply to one specific component. Yes.
So there's a conversation about device orientation. This deals with bandwidth and all of that, but is there any way to acknowledge the orientation of device?
So a media condition in the picture element and with source set, it's similar to what we call the media query, but it's not as full featured. I do believe that you have the option to do like conditions based on device orientation. I'm 75% sure that exists, but I don't know off the top of my head. So, yes.
You mentioned a couple resources that you found very helpful for learning more about the source set attribute. Do you have those to share?
Yep. Responsive Images by Eric Portis, the 101 interview with Jason Grigsby, and then just a bunch of them. The one with Eric Portis I think is probably my favorite because he does a really great job of literally throwing in the everything plus the kitchen sink, but he also includes performance benchmarks with all of them for like, here's what you're loading in, so you get to see the gains that this gives. So it's one that for me is like, this is why it's worth the added headache. Do last question.
If you had one feature that you could have fixed or built on the picture module or the complete images, what would it be?
If I could have one feature,
Requests that you want to have in your bug fixed.
if I could have one thing, and I've been thinking of how to implement this, it would be for the ability to have file type fallbacks. So to actually be able to upload a JPEG and have Drupal convert it to a WebP to a JPEG XR, get those performance gains, and then render that markup in the picture element. So, awesome. Thank you.